All right, we're near the end now. Season 8, Episode 4, The Last of the Starks. This is the Game of Thrones Companion Podcast presented by The Disorderly. Please head over to thedisorderly.com for the best in sports and entertainment. And I'm very excited to talk about this episode, so let's get right to it. I'll start by saying it was my favorite of the season. And it seems like that'd be the case for most people watching. I mean, it had a little bit of everything, right? If you enjoy the happy, emotional sort of reunions of Episode 1, you got that with the celebration scene at the beginning. If you prefer the solemn moments of Episode 2, you had plenty of that with the funeral at the beginning and the goodbyes shared between Jon Snow and the wildlings, etc. And of course, if you're here for the politics, they were sprinkled throughout the episode, bringing back the thing I loved most about Thrones all along. I can't wait to see how this thing wraps up. But let's get into this episode before we start getting ahead of ourselves. We see tearful goodbyes to our main fallen characters from the last episode, Ser Jorah, Theon. There was a nice moment where Sansa gave Theon a pin with the Stark sigil, furthering the sort of conclusion of his story arc, that he finally has a home and a family. There's also a nice moment with Dany where she whispers something to Jorah, but it's not clear what she says. And the script actually says Daenerys whispers something to him that he'll never hear and we'll never know, which is kind of beautiful. It's really kind of a bittersweet, poetic moment, very well written. Jon Snow, of course, gives a powerful speech about what these men and women sacrificed their lives for, the shields that guarded the realms of men, and the funeral pyres were burned, and thus the Battle of Winterfell has come to an end. And just like that, the politics begin. It did not take long. Unsurprisingly, the celebratory dinner was just getting started when Dany decides to name Gendry the Lord of Storm's End and names him Gendry Baratheon rather than Gendry Rivers. Which, by the way, I didn't know. I know Snow was a bastard name, and then if you're from the South, it was Sand. I don't think that. Did they ever say? I'm sure this is in the books. I don't know in the show. Have they ever called a bastard from what, King's Landing, the rivers? I don't know. Anyway, he's no longer Gendry Rivers. He's Gendry Baratheon. He's no longer a bastard. It's clear that her naming him Baratheon and giving him Storm's End is for a reason, right? She now has a player in her corner, somebody who is loyal to her specifically, which is important because Dany is losing people left and right. Now, you could argue that Arya would have his loyalty because he's in love with her, but she also just rejected him. But we'll get to that. There's an important look for Sansa in this moment, literally a look of a facial expression. Dany looks to Tyrion and says, "See, you're not the only one who's clever." At that exact moment, you see Sansa with a troubling look on her face, realizing exactly what the naming of Gendry really meant politically. It seems that Dany's not the only one who's clever either. Sansa's pretty damn clever herself, so that's something to keep an eye on. Speaking of looks, Tormund is going on this rant about how amazing Jon is, and you can see it start to really sink in with Dany that she has a struggle on her hands. She's in trouble. The people are much more likely to support Jon based on his personality and leadership and gender alone. Add in the fact that he is secretly the rightful heir. That's going to be a problem for our Khaleesi, right? And that's starting to hit her. Not that she wasn't aware of it, because clearly she is, but it's really starting to sink in, like, I have to deal with this problem. Shortly after that, we have one of my favorite lines in the episode, and really one that sums up the entire episode, if not the entire season. Tyrion says, "We may have defeated them, we still have us to contend with," referring to the White Walkers and the army of the undead. You know, now that they're gone, now you have to see how these other people, these unlikely bedfellows, get along, and you know, now that there's not a common enemy, what's going to happen with the rest of the crew there? It's interesting. Anyway, shortly after that, Sansa delivered my other favorite line of the episode. The Hound says, "You changed, little bird. None of it would have happened if you'd left King's Landing with me. No Littlefinger, no Ramsay, none of it." To which Sansa replies, "Without Littlefinger and Ramsay and the rest, I would have stayed a little bird all my life." Badass. You know, first of all, it's badass. Sansa is cooking up something. She's been cooking it up all episode, and I can't wait for the big reveal. But I also love the dichotomy with the Hound, right? He's one of the wildest, scariest characters in the show, and yet he has this soft spot for the daughters of Catelyn Stark. Whether it's driven by guilt or just because the Hound is a good person deep down, whatever it is, he seems to have this bond with Arya and Sansa, and it's endearing. It's endearing because it's unexpected. It doesn't necessarily fit with his, at least, you know, outward personality, and it's great. But anyway, back to the episode. Gendry gets rejected when he proposes to Arya, as I mentioned, and Jaime and Brienne have sex. I loved both storylines. Arya is back to being a weapon, and Brienne finally gets out of the friend zone. Brilliant. But this reprieve from battle also gives us a chance to see Jon and Dany sort out their issues. Mr. Noble, Mr. Honorable, Jon feels this need to tell everyone the truth. Dany is making a whole lot of sense, right? She's saying that this truth will spell the end of their relationship and possibly the end of Dany's life. Dany gives a tearful plea but Jon sort of insists on being honorable because of course he does. He's Ned Stark's son, even though he's not. He says that she's his queen and they're his family and that they can all live together happily, to which Dany flips to a very serious, almost threatening tone and says, "We can, I just told you how." Jon wastes no time, by the way, of course, in telling his siblings and spilling the beans on everything. But what would you expect, honestly? This is sort of in line with his personality, as stupid as it is. He tells Sansa and Arya. Bran already knew, obviously. I think Bran is basically responsible for telling Jon. And Sansa tells Tyrion, who tells Varys, and who the hell knows who else. So it's cat's out of the bag, right? Everyone knows, or at least enough people know where this thing's not stopping. No one's keeping this secret. So we'll see what happens with that. I wanted to spend a little extra time on this next scene in the war room because it sort of sets up the plan for the rest of the episode and the episodes to follow. We start by recounting our troops. Half of Khaleesi's army is gone. Half of the Northmen are gone as well. And the Golden Company is with Euron Greyjoy and the Iron Fleet in King's Landing, all serving under Cersei. Lord Varys sort of expresses that the balance of forces is even, or practically even, or whatever it is. So that should give you some idea of where we stand now with both those armies. Some side notes: Yara has apparently taken back the Iron Islands and pledged her loyalty to Dany, as well as the new Prince of Dorne. Now remember, I don't know if this will come into play, but Alleria may still be in Cersei's prison. We last saw her alive and chained to a wall, forced to watch her daughter die and sort of wither away. And I think the promise was that Cersei's going to keep her alive to see it. I don't know. I could possibly see her popping up during the Battle of King's Landing, but who knows? I don't know. It's just something to keep in mind. We see some pretty aggressive impulses throughout this episode by Dany, as is, but she's sort of tempered by her advisors. Everyone tells Dany to kind of chill and starve the city. Eventually, the city will overthrow Cersei if they just wait long enough. Sansa also tells them to wait to let the troops recover. Dany sort of listens to the whole starving bit, but refuses to wait as far as, putting her troops into action. They're not just going to wait and build their troops back up, because the longer they wait, the more powerful her enemy becomes, or something along those lines. Of course, this turns out to be a bad idea, but we'll get to that later. So here's the final plan as summed up by Tyrion. So Jon Snow and Ser Davos will ride down the King's Road with the northern troops and the remainder of the Dothraki and Unsullied, essentially the whole army. A smaller group, including Daenerys, Tyrion, Grey Worm, Missandei, and both dragons, will sail to Dragonstone through the White Harbor, where they'll presumably be safe. Dany wraps this little meeting up by saying, "We have won the Great War, now we will win the last war. In all 7 kingdoms, men will live without fear and cruelty under their rightful queen." Well, she's not really the rightful queen, so that's problematic to say the least. Well, here's how things actually go. Euron ambushes Daenerys at Dragonstone and killed Jon's dragon. So now there's only one dragon left. Presumably a bunch of Dany's troops died as Euron attacked the ships, but the main players, Tyrion, Varys, and Grey Worm, all make it. Dany makes it too because she decides to fly away. Basically, she was, cruising in to light up all the ships with fire. Then she realizes that all those ships are mounted with those giant crossbow scorpions, becoming too dangerous for her to attack Euron's fleet, right? So she about faces, leaves. Presumably her flying away leads to 2 things. Again, a bunch of her troops probably died in the attack, and arguably worse, Missandei was captured by Cersei. So Dany keeps getting pushed closer to becoming the Mad Queen, right? They killed her dragon, they took one of her top advisors, and now Cersei has surrounded herself with innocent people, so if Dany wants to get to Cersei, she'll have to kill innocent people, thousands of them, along the way. In the end, they kill Missandei, and Dany has a crazy look in her eye, like crazy. This may be the moment where she snaps, and maybe the moment where she turns bad, making the next episode wildly intriguing. I didn't hate on the first few episodes like other people seem to, but this episode was my favorite of them all. It's also worth mentioning that the final line by Missandei, Dracarys, was presumably a last sort of piece of advice for Dany, saying that she should burn them all. Burn them all like the Mad King. Sound familiar? I'm so goddamn excited for these next 2 episodes. So excited. But we'll wrap things up with some other news and notes from the episode, because these are long, man. An hour and a half, a lot goes on. So in other news and notes, Bronn trades up with Tyrion and Jaime. He makes a deal to not kill them, and in lieu of Cersei promising him River Run, Tyrion now promises him Highgarden, which is a much better place. Also, the Hound and Arya are traveling south for some unfinished business, presumably to kill the Mountain and Cersei, respectively. Sam and Gilly are having a baby. Oh, and Jon's direwolf is going with Tormund up north. He just sort of gave him away. That was kind of anticlimactic, but honestly, the entire show version of the direwolves has been anticlimactic, so I guess, it's fitting. They're a footnote. I guess I've never read the books, but in the books, they seem like they're a much bigger deal. I think all the Starks can warg into them, all sorts of stuff. So that's obviously a trend that the show didn't follow, and we're kind of seeing the fitting ending to that storyline. Whatever. In some more crucial news and notes, it looks like Varys is going to attempt to murder the queen. Right? He basically so much as says it out loud. Jaime leaves Brienne in the middle of the night by going on a huge rant about how evil he is and how much he loves Cersei, breaking Brienne's heart. I, by the way, took this as a bluff. Just saying what he needs to say in order to get Brienne not to follow him, right? Like the scene in Air Bud where the kid tells the dog, get out of here, go, I don't want you anymore. That's how I sort of read that. So I don't buy it that he means any of this. I don't buy it that he's actually going to fight for Cersei. It just wouldn't make sense to me. I think he's going there to kill Cersei. I could see her killing him. I could see him going there with that mission and ultimately dying for it. She's pretty heartless these days. I think that much is clear. Even compared to her old self, it seems like she has nothing left, completely detached ever since all her kids died. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect out of Cersei. She's the biggest wild card in the entire series right now, and that's a good thing. My biggest lingering question, why did the Lord bring Jon Snow back? The Lord of the Light seems to have basically a purpose for three very specific people. Sir Davos sacrificed himself to save Arya. Lady Melisandre bought time with the flaming weapons and flaming trenches, and then, most importantly, set Arya on the right path to kill the Night King. But what the heck did Jon do in the battle that warranted him being brought back from the dead? Nothing specific, right? Like, he fought hard, I guess, but it seems like there would be a more specific moment that led them to victory or something that made it very clear why this guy, Jon Snow, had to be brought back from the dead, why he was crucial. Perhaps his purpose is still yet to manifest. Or perhaps it was just kind of to bring everyone to get together for the battle and hold off the forces for long enough for Arya to, kill the Night King. I don't know. Seems like unfinished business to me. But with that, we will wrap this episode, Season 8, Episode 4, The Last of the Starks. Only two left. Only two left after this. Granted, they're both long, so there's plenty of screen time left, but only 2 episodes left. 2 more Sunday nights where we get to get excited for and discuss Game of Thrones, and that's sad. I'm sure there will be prequel series. I'm sure there will be all sorts of stuff, spin-offs, whatever. But I don't know. It's sad. Game of Thrones is coming to an end. I love this show. I'm loving this season so far, even though there have been some holes. I think it's because people are putting too much pressure on it. I think it's been on par with Game of Thrones. I think this last episode was proof of that, and I'm excited to see how these guys wrap it up. So I hope you keep joining us for the Game of Thrones Companion Podcast. Once again, we're presented by The Disorderly. You can find us at thedisorderly.com for the best in sports entertainment. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Rizner, Nickrizner, and I will catch you guys next week. Peace.